Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling something I know a lot of you have been asking about.
Oh,
Let me guess.
telekinesis. We're diving deep into the world of moving things with your mind.
Ah, yes. Telekinesis. It's a concept that's been around for, well, probably as long as humans have. I mean, who hasn't wished they could move something with just a thought?
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got a really cool mix of sources, historical accounts, modern scientific studies. We even found some theoretical physics thrown in there.
Sounds like we have our work cut out for us.
We do. But I think it'll be a fascinating journey as we try to answer the question, can our minds really influence the physical world? Like, for real?
It's a question that has captivated people for centuries. I mean, we see it pop up in folklore and mythology all over the globe. But it really seemed to take off in the late 19th century with the rise of spiritualism.
Oh, yeah. The seances and mediums and all that. That's actually where some of our historical accounts come from. Right. There were some pretty famous figures back then, like Daniel Dunglas home. He claimed to levitate objects, even himself sometimes.
And we can't forget Eusapia Palladino.
Ah, yes. Her seances were legendary, full of stories of moving furniture and these mysterious touches seemingly from nowhere.
They really captured the public's imagination, didn't they?
They did, but along with the excitement, there was also a lot of skepticism. Back then, there weren't really reliable ways to investigate these phenomena scientifically.
So was it all just trickery then?
It's hard to say for sure. Some probably was, but it's also possible there were genuine phenomena happening that people just couldn't explain at the time. But the tools and methods for scientific investigation were limited, so it's tough to separate genuine occurrences from, trickery or just plain wishful thinking.
That makes sense. What I find really interesting, though, is that even today, with all our fancy scientific methods, the possibility of telekinesis is still being researched.
You're absolutely right. And some of the research is happening in some pretty surprising areas, like neuroscience, for example. They're learning so much about the power of the mind. Think about the placebo effect. That's where our beliefs and expectations can have a real, measurable impact on our bodies. So if our thoughts can do that, influence our internal state so strongly, it makes you wonder, could they also influence the external world too?
Okay, so let me see if I'm getting this. If my mind can make my body believe a sugar pill is actual medicine, then maybe, just maybe, it could make a dice roll a 6, right?
You got it. Well, that's a very simplified way of putting it, of course, but you're on the right track. It's all about exploring the limits of what we traditionally think of as mind and matter, that age-old separation. What if it's not so separate after all?
Now we're getting into some mind-bending stuff. And speaking of mind-bending, we can't forget about quantum mechanics. We actually have some sources that touch on this. That's the physics of all the really weird, tiny stuff, right? Subatomic particles and all that.
That's the one. And one of the key concepts in quantum mechanics is something called entanglement. It's where two particles are linked together in this really strange way, even if they're miles apart.
Linked how?
Well, if you change one particle, the other one changes instantly no matter how far away it is. It's like they're communicating faster than the speed of light, which, according to Einstein, is impossible.
Whoa, so it's like telepathic particles.
In a way, yeah. That's actually a great way to think about it. And what's really fascinating is that some physicists, like David Bohm, propose that consciousness itself might be woven into this interconnected web of reality.
Woven in how?
He called it the implicate order, this idea that there's a deeper level of reality where everything is connected. And maybe, just maybe, consciousness plays a part in these weird, non-local interactions between entangled particles.
Hold on, so you're saying our minds might be tapping into this level of reality where the rules of physics as we know them maybe don't apply. Like where things can happen that seem impossible to us.
Yeah. It's one of the theories being explored, and yeah, it's definitely mind-blowing. This opens up the possibility that telekinesis, if it's real, might not be some supernatural force, but a result of these really fundamental, interconnected laws of the universe.
Okay, wow. So to recap, we've got these historical accounts that are really intriguing, some hints from neuroscience that maybe our minds are more powerful than we think. Then there's this whole quantum physics angle where, maybe reality is just way weirder than we thought. So what about modern day attempts to study telekinesis directly? Is there any actual scientific evidence to back it up?
There is a whole field of research dedicated to this called parapsychology. And while it was considered pretty fringe for a long time, The methods they're using are becoming much more rigorous.
So they're not just, sitting in dark rooms trying to move tables anymore.
Not exactly. Modern parapsychologists use some pretty sophisticated tools and techniques to study telekinesis in controlled laboratory settings.
Like, give me the details.
Well, one of the tools they're using is neuroimaging, things like fMRI and EEG. fMRI stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging, and it basically lets researchers see which areas of the brain are active during certain tasks.
Okay, so they can actually see what's happening in the brain when someone's trying to move something with their mind. That's amazing.
It is. They can look for specific brain activity patterns that might be unique to telekinesis. And then there's EEG, or electroencephalography.
And that does.
EEG measures brainwave activity using electrodes placed on the scalp. It's super sensitive to even tiny changes in electrical activity in the brain. So researchers can use it to look for any unusual patterns that might be happening when someone attempts telekinesis.
So they're basically searching for any signs that the mind is interacting with the physical world in a way that we don't understand yet.
Exactly. And it's not just brain imaging either. They're also exploring something called biofeedback.
Biofeedback. Now, that's a word I haven't heard in a while. What is that again?
Well, with the biofeedback, you basically give people real-time feedback on their physiological responses, like heart rate, how much they're sweating, or their muscle tension. The cool thing is that by becoming aware of these responses, people can learn to control them consciously.
So it's like learning to control the things your body usually does automatically.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And some researchers believe that this kind of control over your body, over these normally involuntary processes, might be connected to telekinetic abilities.
Okay, so maybe it's not just about the mind influencing matter, but also the body playing a role too. Maybe some kind of mind-body connection we're only starting to understand.
That's the idea. It's this really intricate puzzle, and we're still putting all the pieces together.
So do all these experiments actually prove that telekinesis is real? Like, is there a definitive answer?
Well, the results are still up for debate.
Mm-hmm.
Some studies do show some statistically significant effects. Like there might actually be something to this idea that our intentions, our thoughts can influence physical systems in these subtle ways. But other studies haven't been able to replicate these findings, so it's a mixed bag, to be honest.
So the mystery continues, which actually makes it all the more exciting.
You got it. The fact that we don't have all the answers is what drives scientific inquiry. We're still in the early stages of exploring this phenomenon. There's so much more to uncover.
Speaking of exploring, I read somewhere that researchers are even using virtual reality to study telekinesis. Is that right?
Oh yeah, virtual reality is actually a really neat way to study this stuff. Think about it. In a virtual world, you can control everything. So you can create these really controlled environments to study telekinesis with minimal distractions and super precise measurements.
That is so cool. It's like science fiction is becoming reality right before our eyes.
It kind of is. And this is just one example of how technology is helping us investigate the potential of the human mind in ways that were never possible before.
So we've got brain imaging, biofeedback, and now virtual reality, all being used to investigate telekinesis. Wow. It seems like researchers are really dedicated to figuring this out.
They are. And it's not just about the experiments. They're also trying to come up with theoretical frameworks, to explain how telekinesis might actually work, to find a model that makes sense.
Okay, let's get into that. What are some of the leading theories out there? What are the contenders for explaining this?
Well, there are a few. But to be honest, there's no single theory yet that fully explains it. One of the most promising areas of research goes back to what we were talking about earlier, quantum mechanics and consciousness.
The mind influencing reality at the quantum level.
You got it. That's the basic idea. Another possibility is that it's not just about the mind. Maybe the human body itself has certain properties that we don't fully grasp yet, properties that could play a role in telekinesis.
Like what?
Well, there's this theory that our bodies generate these very weak electromagnetic fields. And maybe, just maybe, these fields can interact with matter in ways we haven't fully discovered yet.
So it's not just our minds trying to move stuff, but also our bodies generating forces that could affect the world around us.
Exactly. It's this incredibly complex web of interactions we're dealing with. It's a real scientific mystery.
It sounds like there's still a lot of debate and uncertainty in this field. Like, scientists are still trying to figure out what's what.
That's the nature of scientific inquiry, though, isn't it?
Mm.
Both of these theoretical approaches have people who support them and people who are skeptical. But the encouraging thing is that there's a lot more dialogue happening now between physicists, psychologists, neuroscientists, even philosophers are getting involved.
So it's becoming a truly interdisciplinary field.
It has to be, to really get a handle on something as complex as telekinesis. To understand how the mind might interact with matter, we need to bring in experts from all these different areas.
I love that. It's like all these brilliant minds coming together to try to crack the code of telekinesis.
Exactly. And it's leading to some really fascinating and groundbreaking research.
This deep dive is already blowing my mind, and we haven't even touched on the potential applications of telekinesis yet. Like, what could this mean for our world if it turns out to be real?
Well, that is a whole other fascinating rabbit hole to go down. The potential applications of telekinesis. Oh, there are tons. It's pretty mind-blowing when you really start to think about it. Where should we even begin?
Well, how about healthcare? That seems like a good place to start. I mean, if we could really move things with our minds, it seems like it could have some pretty big implications for medicine.
Absolutely. Healthcare is definitely one of the areas where telekinesis could have the most profound impact. Imagine stroke patients using their minds to control robotic limbs, regaining their mobility, their independence. Think about what that would mean for their quality of life.
Wow. That would be incredible. It's like something you'd see in a movie, but to think it could actually become reality is amazing.
It really is. And it's not just about physical rehabilitation either. What about using telekinesis to help people with mental health conditions? Like, could it be used to help people with anxiety learn to regulate their emotions, to calm themselves down? Or for people with depression, to maybe help them shift their mental state in a positive direction?
So it's not just about moving objects in the physical world, but also about potentially influencing our internal states, our thoughts and emotions. It's like using the power of the mind to heal the mind.
Exactly. The possibilities are truly mind-boggling. But let's zoom out a bit, move beyond healthcare. What about the potential impact on industry? Like, how could telekinesis change the way we work and manufacture things?
Okay, yeah, industry. What kind of telekinetic innovations could we see in that realm? It's hard to even imagine.
Well, for starters, imagine factories where workers control machinery with their minds. No more physical controls, just pure thought.
So instead of using your hands to operate a machine, you'd just use your mind to direct it, like a mental remote control.
Precisely. Think about the precision and control you could achieve. It could lead to safer workplaces, more efficient production lines, and maybe even more creative designs, since you're not limited by the physical constraints of traditional tools.
That's pretty incredible. Although it also makes me think of all those sci-fi movies where the robots become self-aware and take over. Hopefully we can avoid that scenario.
Haha. Well, let's hope so. But on a more serious note, you bring up an important point. All of these potential benefits of telekinesis come with potential risks and ethical concerns that we need to address.
Okay, yes, the ethical side of things, that's a big one. What are some of the concerns that come to mind when you think about telekinesis?
Well, one of the biggest ones is the potential for misuse. If telekinesis allows you to move objects with your mind, what's to stop someone from using it to harm others? I mean, it's like having a superpower, but without any clear rules or regulations.
That's a scary thought. It's like, how do you even begin to control something like that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If telekinesis becomes a reality, we'd need to have serious discussions about ethical guidelines, regulations, maybe even legal restrictions on how it can be used. We need to think about things like licensing and training, maybe even some kind of telekinetic ethics committee.
A telekinetic ethics committee. Now that's an image. It sounds both futuristic and a little bit terrifying at the same time.
I know, right? It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. But it highlights how important it is to start thinking about these issues now before we find ourselves in a world where telekinesis is commonplace. We need to be prepared.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. It definitely applies here.
Absolutely. And there's another ethical concern we need to consider. Equality. What if the ability to develop telekinesis isn't evenly distributed? What if only certain people have the potential to develop these powers?
Ooh, that's interesting. It's like, would it create a new class divide? Those who have telekinetic abilities and those who don't.
Exactly. Would people with telekinesis be seen as superior? Would they be discriminated against? Would they be exploited for their abilities? These are all questions we need to grapple with.
Wow, this deep dive is getting pretty intense. We're talking about potentially reshaping society as we know it.
We are. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations. We need to be mindful of the potential consequences of such a powerful ability, both the positive and the negative. We need to approach this with both excitement and caution.
It's definitely a lot to think about. This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey. We've gone from historical accounts of seances and mediums to cutting-edge scientific experiments, from mind-bending theories in quantum physics to these really profound ethical dilemmas. It's incredible to think that something that's been relegated to the realm of science fiction for so long could actually become part of our reality.
It really is, and I think it speaks to the power of human curiosity and our drive to understand the universe and our place in it. Telekinesis challenges our fundamental understanding of what's possible, of what it means to be human, and that's both exciting and a little bit scary.
So much to think about. I'm curious, though, are scientists any closer to actually understanding how telekinesis might work? I mean, with all this research, are they getting anywhere?
It's still early days, but researchers are definitely making some headway. One area that's gaining a lot of traction is what's called micro-PK, short for micro-psychokinesis.
Micro PK. Okay, break that down for me. What is that?
So instead of focusing on, moving big objects like tables and chairs, micro-PK looks at these really subtle influences. Like, can your intention affect something small?
Like what?
Imagine trying to influence a coin toss. Or maybe even those random number generators computers use.
Ah, I see. So instead of trying to get those big dramatic telekinesis effects you see in movies, they're looking for tiny, almost invisible changes.
Exactly. The idea is that these super subtle effects can be measured statistically and analyzed really rigorously. It makes for much stronger scientific evidence.
So are they finding anything? Like, does micro PK actually work?
It's still a mixed bag. Some studies show some pretty interesting results, statistically significant stuff that suggests our intentions might actually be influencing these physical systems. But then other studies haven't been able to replicate those findings.
So it's kind of like they're picking up a faint signal, but they need more data to be sure it's not just static.
That's a great way to put it. But even those faint signals are exciting. They suggest that maybe, just maybe, there's something real here, something that we don't fully understand yet.
It's like we're on the verge of this whole new scientific frontier. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. And the deeper we go, the more we realize how much we don't know. But that's what makes it so exciting. I mean, who knows what we might discover as we continue to explore the mysteries of the mind and the universe.
This has been such an awesome deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from those old school stories of seances and mediums to all the cool new scientific research that's happening. We even got into the really deep questions about the nature of reality and the ethics of telekinesis.
It's been quite the journey.
Yeah.
And I think it highlights how important it is to stay curious, to keep asking questions and exploring new ideas, even if they seem, a little out there.
Totally. I have to admit, this whole deep dive has left me with more questions than answers, but honestly, I kind of like that. It makes you want to keep learning and exploring.
Exactly. Science is all about asking questions, testing hypotheses, and constantly refining our understanding of the world around us. And sometimes the most intriguing questions are the ones that don't have easy answers.
Well said. So, to everyone listening out there, if you're as fascinated by telekinesis as we are, we encourage you to keep digging. Read more, explore different perspectives, maybe even try some experiments of your own. You never know, maybe you'll be the one to make the next big breakthrough.
It's amazing to think about the potential of the human mind. We're only scratching the surface of what might be possible.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of telekinesis. Until next time, keep those minds open, keep those questions coming, and who knows, maybe we'll all be moving things with our minds someday.